We're looking at factors that affect biodiversity. And one of those factors is where you are on the planet. So there is more biodiversity by the equator than there is in the temperate or the polar regions. And there are a few reasons for that. One is that there have not been glaciers by the equator, but there certainly have been in northern climates. And so picture a glacier coming down this way. It kills off a lot of species, right? And so you have species diversity here drop because of the glacier pretty dramatically, whereas the glaciers really haven't made it to the equator. And so the species haven't been, killed off and have to restart over and over again like they have in areas where we've had glaciers. So that's one reason. Another is that you just have faster generation time. And so if you look at evolution of new species, a lot of it has to do with generation time, right? So evolution is a change in a population over time, and that has to do with how many generations you have over time, lots and lots of generation times here generally, because species don't have to go dormant in the tropics because the temperature is always very, very similar. If you look up north or down south, the climate gets cold, and so species tend to either go dormant or their reproductive cycles slow down. And so you end up getting a lot higher species diversity toward the tropics. Another factor that affects species diversity is evapotranspiration. So evaporation, right? How much water evaporates from the soil or from wherever, and transpiration, evaporation out of plants, right? And so this is really, it seems that it's really water availability. And so if you have lots of water availability, you tend to have high species diversity. If you have very low water availability, you tend to have very low species diversity. Okay, area effects. These become really important, especially on an island. So this is a species area curve. And the first thing I want you to notice is that it's a log scale. So if you start at 1, whoops, the next line over is 10. And then we're going up by another order of magnitude to 100, to 1,000, to 10,000, and so on, right? So that's a log scale, and it's actually log on both sides. And so this is actually a pretty dramatic curve. So if you look at a really big area, you tend to get a really big species diversity, lots of species. Smaller areas, whoops, pretend I drew a straight line, tend to have smaller species diversity. And so that's really important on an island. So that brings us to the island equilibrium model. It says that species richness on islands depends on the island size and on the distance of the island from the mainland. And this has to do with two factors, immigration and extinction. And so just to summarize it first before I show you the graphs, for island size, if you have a small island and a big island, the big island is going to have higher species diversity. And the small island is going to have low species diversity. Here's a mainland of some type. And if we're looking at distance, here's an island that's close to the mainland, and here's an island that's further away from the mainland. And so we would think that the island that's close is going to have a higher species diversity, and the island that's further away from the mainland is going to have a lower species diversity. And that has to do with a couple of things, immigration to the island and extinction on the island. And so let's take a look at some graphs that show this. And so here's the first one. And so we're looking at number of species on an island, so very few species here and a lot of species here, and then rates of immigration or extinction, so rate of turnover in general. So let's look at immigration. So this isn't just how many organisms make it to the island, it's how many organisms actually get to the island and can establish themselves. So if we're looking at very few species on the island, pretty much anyone who makes it over is going to be able to establish themselves. So we're going to expect a really high immigration rate. On the other hand, if you have a lot of species already living there, then anyone who gets to the island has a very low chance of actually being able to establish themselves on the island. So you get this downward curve. This other curve, the extinction rate, this is just local extinction, extinction from the island. It's not extinction from the planet. So if you have very, very few species on the island, then there's going to be a very low extinction rate because there'll be niches for everybody, right? So whoever's living there is probably not going to go extinct. But if you have a really a lot of species on the island, you're going to get a higher extinction rate from the island, right? Locally from the island, because maybe newcomers will be better adapted and can cause you to go extinct, right? So that means with lots of species on the island, there's going to be a lot of competition, and so you're going to get a higher extinction rate. Where these two curves come together, this is your equilibrium number. So this is your number of different species that you're going to find on this particular island. This is a dynamic number, meaning let's say you have 180 different species that live on this island. You might expect about 180 different species to live on that island more or less forever, but the particular species will be different. So maybe you'll have 5 new species in the next decade become established on that island. You would expect 5 extinctions as well on that island. So this is the base model. Now we're going to look at this middle graph, and we're looking at island size and how that affects the number of species on an island. So let's look at large versus small islands and immigration rates. So remember, immigration isn't just who makes it there, it's who makes it there and can establish themselves. So there's a couple of things. With a large island, you're just going to have a bigger target. And so if you're on a mainland and there's a storm and it brings seeds out to sea, if you have a bigger target, more of those seeds are going to make it to the island. So you're going to have a bigger immigration rate on a bigger island. You would also maybe expect more different niches on that island. And so more of them that make it there will actually become established. And so you're just going to expect a higher immigration rate on a bigger island, mainly because it's a big target. Now we're looking at extinctions. You'd expect more local extinctions on a small island because you have fewer places for them to live, right? Fewer niches. And so they're going to be more extinctions. On a large island, there are more niches. They can kind of fit more different types of organisms. So you're going to expect fewer to go extinct. So now what we need to look at is the intersection of these lines. And so here's extinction on a large island and immigration on a large island. So this gives you the number of species that you would expect on a large island. The intersection of the extinction rate of a small island versus immigration rate of a small island is over here. So you would actually expect fewer species on a small island than you would on a large island. The other thing to notice here is that this line is slightly higher on the y-axis, so you're going to actually have a little bit more turnover on a large island than you would on a smaller island. So that's island size. And now we're going to assume island size is the same, but we're going to look at distance from the mainland. And so immigration on a near island versus a far island. Picture a far island really, really far out to sea versus one that you could practically see maybe from the mainland. You're going to have a much greater rate of immigration. Lots of organisms are going to make it there. So let me see if I can draw this a little bit. So here's your close island, and I'm going to make the distant island here just so I can here's some species. And if you look at these arrows, there's actually more, these are all the same distance apart, right? This one makes it to this island, this one makes it to this island. This one just doesn't because the island is so far away. So the closer you are to the mainland, the more likely you are to have an immigration event. So looking down here, you get a higher rate of immigration on a near island than you do on a far island. For extinction, this one's actually kind of interesting. If you have a close island and a distant island, picture a species that's not super well adapted and it kind of struggles, and the population on both of them is starting to go down. They're almost going extinct. With this one, you might have an individual of that particular species make it to the island and add a little genetic diversity, and so the population continues here, so it doesn't go extinct. But that immigration event never happens here, and so that particular species actually goes extinct on this island. So you would expect a greater extinction rate on a distant island than you would on a near island. So now if you look at the species diversity on those islands, the near island actually has more species than the distant island does. So to recap for this whole thing, you would expect greater species diversity on a close island than on a distant island, and you would expect greater species diversity with a big island than with a small island. And so if you look at the Galapagos Islands, there are studies of species richness, and it actually tends to look just like our island model. So the bigger islands tend to get more species, and the small islands tend to have fewer species living there, fewer numbers of plant species. This isn't, this particular graph isn't looking at island distance, but I would bet that these islands are probably closer to the mainland because they have more species than you would expect. And these, I would bet, are kind of distant.